Welcome to African Stories by Asada, the Cynic Driver's YouTube channel. Where are you watching from? In this ride, the cynical driver picks up 3 passengers, an angry white homeowner living next to an encampment, a thoughtful and empathetic man who volunteers with the homeless, and a city worker trying to explain government struggles. In this episode, the car becomes a small moving courtroom where the city itself is on trial. The conversation weaves between anger, compassion, bureaucracy, and cynicism. The woman vents about fear, property damage, fires, and sleepless nights. The thoughtful man reminds them of the humanity in tents: parents, children, veterans, people with names, not labels. The city worker outlines policies, funding limits, lawsuits, and slow wins. The driver cuts through with raw cynicism, painting both sides as trapped in cycles. Before we dive into the story, we encourage you to rate the video and tell us in the comments below where you are watching from. Like, share, and subscribe so that you will be the first to be notified of our next video. Coming up. The afternoon sun hung low, glaring through the windshield, as the driver pulled over on a narrow side street. 3 figures waited at the curb, talking in quick bursts. The first to climb in was a white woman in her late 40s, jaw tight, sunglasses pushed back into her blonde hair. She carried herself with the impatience of someone already halfway through an argument. Next came a tall, well-dressed black man whose calm eyes and easy smile softened the tension as he settled into the seat. Finally, a man in a gray city-issued jacket eased in last, his posture slightly weary and his ID badge swinging on a lanyard. The driver glanced in the rearview, catching fragments of strained civility between them. The woman wasted no time. "You know, my house is basically on top of that encampment now, and every damn week it gets worse." The woman leaned forward, voice like sandpaper. She described tents spilling over the sidewalk, trash pressed against her fence, and late-night shouting snapping her awake. Her teen daughter won't walk the dog alone anymore. Her husband installed motion lights and still found needles by the rosebush. She called hotlines, left messages, got polite nothing back. "I pay my taxes, I pay my mortgage, I vote, I do everything right, and every day I feel like a hostage in my own house." She pressed 2 fingers against her temple as if holding it together by force. "I'm tired of being told to be patient and compassionate while my property turns into a doorstep for chaos. You can call it whatever you want. I call it danger. I call it fear. And I'm done whispering about it." The car's heater hummed while the street rolled under them like a dare. The thoughtful man spoke softly, the way people do when they've seen too much and learn not to shout. He said he volunteers on Saturdays at a church pantry where encampment residents come for soup and shower vouchers. A woman named Lena hums while waiting, clutching a cracked plastic comb like a prayer. A man named Gus sleeps sitting up because the ground is too cold, even in August. He said they're not monsters invading your porch. They're people whose bodies ache like ours do. He didn't excuse the thefts or the noise. He didn't dress it in bright words. He just asked them to picture hunger that bends your back and a night so long you start talking to wind. People do terrible things when they're cornered. But corners are built by hands we vote for and budgets we forget to read. The city worker cleared his cross, as if asking permission to exist in the same air. His jacket carried the faint smell of dust and coffee. 2 weeks ago, we posted notices, offered shelter transport, assessments, storage for belongings. Some accepted, many refused. He didn't hide behind jargon, he walked through it. We can't arrest our way out. Courts restrict clearances when there aren't beds. Shelters fill. We add cots, fire codes push back. Hotels want guarantees, budgets want proof, neighborhoods want distance. The woman snapped, "And my block gets the fallout?" He nodded, accepting the punch. "You're carrying what the system drops." His fingers tapped his badge like a metronome for uncomfortable truth. "We've had wins, families placed, a treatment slot opened at midnight, a veteran in Keys last Friday, but wins arrive like slow rain. Your storm is daily." He looked tired, not defensive. Traffic thickened around Orange Barrels. exclamation points planted in fresh asphalt. The woman jabbed her finger toward new bike bollards glinting like teeth. "Money for this, but not to clean my alley?" The driver kept the wheel steady, mouth tight. The thoughtful man leaned forward. "Different funding streams. You can't pay for addiction treatment with a street redesign grant." She snorted, "Money's money until someone decides it isn't." He didn't flinch. Strings aren't excuses, they're knots we have to untie while the boat is sinking. The driver let out a low laugh that wasn't funny. Cities good at ribbon cuttings, bad at ribbon living. A bus sighed alongside them, windows full of blank faces. For a half block, nobody spoke. The barrels watched like patient guards as the city tried to squeeze past itself without touching anything sharp. They rolled by the encampment. Tents bowed under weather, tarps tugged by wind, smoke lifting from a barrel stove. Someone had painted a square of yellow on a canvas flap, a pretend door with a pretend knob. A man tuned a pocket radio, the antenna crooked like a finger. The homeowner's jaw clenched. "Last week, a guy slept under my deck. He had a knife, said it was for protection. From who? Me?" The thoughtful man whispered, "From the night." She shook her head. "From my kid." Her voice frayed at the edges. "I am not a monster for wanting to feel safe." The city worker nodded. "You aren't." The driver watched a woman stir a pot with a tent pole, steam writing brief letters into cold air. He said, "Everyone's building a door they can't open. Some of us just get better paint." The woman's frustration sharpened, words turning into small thrown stones. "You talk like a manual," she said to the city worker. "Meanwhile, my daughter jumps at sirens and I sleep with keys in my fist. We busted ourselves to buy that house. Now I'm cruel if I want peace?" Her anger wasn't elegant. It didn't need to be. The city worker took it without raising his voice. "You're not cruel," he said. "You're carrying fear and calling it by its right name." He rubbed his brow. "We promised safety, and we're not delivering it evenly. The map knows who gets what." The thoughtful man nodded, slow. "Maps are cruel historians," he said. The driver grunted, "and good at repeating themselves." A gust rattled a tarp. A dog barked inside something too thin to be called shelter. The woman stared at her hands as if they had written a law. They passed a schoolyard where kids kicked a ball, laughter lifting over the fence like bright birds. The woman watched, eyes shining with a memory nobody else could see. "I stock the free fridge by the library," she said. "Sandwiches, oranges. I do that, but there's nothing left in my tank. Every night is another argument with silence." The thoughtful man tilted his head. "Compassion burns like any fuel," he said. "It needs refilling or it turns to smoke." She looked at him, annoyed at how true that sounded. "Who refills mine?" The driver snorted. "Nobody. You refill it by believing tomorrow isn't just a prank." The city worker looked down. "We try with tiny wins. A bed, a bus pass, a shower. It is never enough, and it is how we keep breathing at our desks." The ball bounced off the curb and the children chased joy anyway. The driver told a winter story that sat heavy in the car. A man with raw hands, no coat, kicked from a shelter for fighting, stinking of whiskey and apologies. The driver bought him coffee. The man cried like the cup held a passport. 10 minutes later, the tip jar disappeared while the driver used the bathroom. "I kept driving," he said, shrugging. "Not because I'm noble, but because I had rent to." The thoughtful man didn't flinch. "He was drowning," he said. "People claw when they drown." The woman said, "He clawed your kindness." The driver answered, "Kindness is soft armor. It tears easy." The city worker exhaled. "And still we dress in it," he murmured. The driver watched a gull skate on wind above the tents. "Some days I give the ride," he said. "Some days I give the sermon. Both get me about the same tip." They turned onto her block. The encampment rode the railroad berm like a long, weary train of canvas cars. A man pushed a shopping cart loaded with copper wire that flashed like stolen sunlight. They stripped the alley lights. Converters gone up and down the street. It's theft season all year. The city worker swallowed. "We're installing tamper-resistant gear with the utility. Lighting sensors, cage guards, serial tracking, but the scrap market doesn't care about our memos." He rubbed his forehead. "We're targeting the buyers, too." The thoughtful man pointed at a tent with a painted window, curtains sketched in marker. "Someone still believes in mourning," he said. The woman stared at the drawing until her voice thinned. "I miss believing in my porch," she whispered. The driver slowed, letting a cyclist pass. Porches are promises. Hard to keep when the street forgets you. A siren rose and fell into the city's hum. The thoughtful man asked the driver to ease up. "Look at that canvas door," he said, gesturing toward the yellow square again. "A picture of entering, a picture of leaving." The woman blinked. "I painted my door last spring," she said, almost embarrassed by the softness in her tone. "Blue like the lake. I wanted it to feel brave." She studied the tense pretend knob. "Now I double lock it and still listened for footsteps on the deck." The city worker met her gaze in the mirror. "Fear is rational when the world keeps proving it, but fear can't be the only architect." The driver shrugged. "It's the cheapest contractor. Everyone can afford it." For a moment, the car felt like a small boat in rough water. Each breath an oar stroke nobody had agreed to row. The woman's anger reached for the driver, as if he were City Hall with wheels. "What would you do," she demanded, "if your kids slept on the side of my house, shouting at 2 a.m., lighting smokes under your eaves?" The driver chewed the question like gristle. "I'd hate them. Then I'd hate myself for hating them. Then I'd hate the people who told me hating them made me a bad person." He kept his eyes on the road. "Then I'd buy heavier curtains and pretend the world was in a different time zone." The thoughtful man sighed. "Pretending is a wound that never closes," he said. The city worker added, "But pretending is how civic budgets survive town halls." The woman shook her head. "I'm not pretending. I'm demanding." Her jaw set. "If that makes me the villain in your story, write a better story." The thoughtful man spoke of a mother he knew from the pantry, a woman who hid her backpack in a church broom closet, because theft is a tide even among the drowning. Her daughter is 9, reads under streetlights, loves raisins. He described a night when the shelter ran out of beds, and the girl tried to make a pillow out of her shoes. The car quieted, as if the road itself wanted the picture to linger. The woman pressed her lips together. "I'm not blind to suffering," she said, "but my kid also reads under a lamp and jumps when someone screams outside. So whose 9-year-old gets the quiet?" The city worker's answer arrived like a bruise. "The child with a deed and a door, usually. That is the scandal we call normal." The driver nodded once. "Normal is just cruelty with good lighting." They passed a mural of hands building a nest from painted scraps, maps, tickets, the corner of a notice. The city worker pointed. "We funded that," he said, almost apologetic. "Art grants are a different bucket." The woman laughed, short and bitter. "I can't sleep under a mural." The thoughtful man didn't argue. He watched the colors slide past. "Art gives language to the ache," he said, "but language doesn't pick up the trash." The driver added, "It can at least tell us where to put it." The worker nodded, humbled. "The muralist also runs a job program," he offered. "Some people step from paint into paychecks." The woman sighed. "Good. I want paychecks to be contagious." A man with a red beanie crossed against the light, pushing a stroller loaded with blankets. The wind tried to take one. He held on like he was holding a flag. The driver asked the question nobody likes. "What do you want done, exactly?" He kept his tone even, not mocking, just tired of speeches that never survive contact with mornings. The woman didn't hesitate. "Move them, all of them. Not next month, not after another meeting. Move them to a place with bathrooms, with rules, with consequences, and keep them there long enough for the neighborhood to breathe." The thoughtful man winced. "People aren't shipments," he said. "They don't stack neatly in a warehouse." She threw up her hands. "So I pay to live inside a permanent experiment?" The city worker answered carefully. "A sanctioned site could help, managed, staffed, with sanitation and outreach. We're drafting options." The driver cut in.
Options are where hope goes to smoke. The worker didn't disagree. Options are what we have until courage grows a budget, he said. Courage is always underfunded. The woman's voice went raw. Last month, a fire started by the berm. We called 911 twice before the truck even turned onto our street. Flames jumped like they had legs. I stood on my lawn watering sparks. My daughter cried in the bathtub with the dog. Try explaining that to a 12-year-old. Don't worry, sweetie, this is just a policy failure. She stared out the window. I am not the enemy. I'm the neighbor. The thoughtful man nodded. You deserve safety. Everyone does. He paused. But safety can't be built by erasing the unsafe. It only hides it. The city worker added, we're negotiating with the railroad on vegetation clearing, fire lanes, secured zones. We're pushing for a managed camp while more beds come online. The driver exhaled. Beds are bridges, he said. Fine. Where's the other side? The worker's silence was the kind that knows. They reached a red light. A man with a cardboard sign approached, eyes tired, beard gone wild around a face still young enough to be someone's son. The woman stiffened, then rolled her window down 2 inches. No cash, she said, voice flat, handing over a granola bar anyway. He nodded thanks, moved on, and disappeared between cars. The driver watched him weave. He'll get yelled at tonight for eating too close to somebody's tent, he said. The thoughtful man said, territory happens when life gets small. The city worker whispered, we pretend the city is big, but it's small if your world is a single block. The light changed. The cars lurched like a herd. The woman wiped her eyes, angry that kindness had ambushed her. I want solutions, she said to the glass, not moments. The driver answered, moments are where solutions practice being real. The thoughtful man finally raised his voice, not with anger, but insistence. Housing first, he said, not as a slogan, as an operating system. Put people indoors with a lock and a light, then add treatment, job help, counseling. Chaos outside turns every plan into paper. The woman crossed her arms. Where? With what money? He didn't blink. Vacant hotels, adaptive reuse, land trusts, public-private deals that aren't just press conferences. Stop pretending rent is a weather pattern, it's policy. The city worker nodded, throat tight. We have projects queued. We lose them to bids, lawsuits, scared neighbors, and spreadsheets that forget winter. We need courage at zoning meetings more than speeches at ribbon cuttings. The driver cracked a smile. Print that on a billboard. The woman inhaled slowly, as if letting a stubborn thought loosen. Fine, she said, just don't build a future that ignores my street. They passed the lake, flat as steel under a gray sky. A man rinsed a skillet in the shallows, kneeling in water that must have been cold enough to bite. The woman watched him and said nothing. The driver filled the quiet. People buy tents when hope is on backorder, he said. The return policy is terrible. The city worker glanced at the clock on the dash, then back at the shoreline. We offer detox. People often refuse. We offer shelter. They fear theft or rules. We offer storage. It feels like surrender. He rubbed his eyes. Every yes costs someone something. And the thoughtful man nodded. And every no costs everyone. The woman's voice softened just enough to be human again. I don't want to hate anyone. I want to sleep. The driver answered, I don't want sermons. I want keys. Nobody argued with that sentence. The city worker admitted the parts that never make a press release. We fail people, he said. We lose track. A case manager quits. A voucher expires. A bus pass vanishes into someone's pocket, and shame keeps them from asking for another. He looked out at a row of shuttered storefronts. We're building a plane while it's flying, and the passengers are already airsick. The woman shook her head. Don't ask me to clap for turbulence. The thoughtful man asked, what would a win look like on this block? The worker answered, a managed site nearby, 20 portable toilets, showers, regular trash pickup, outreach daily, and a real timeline into housing. Months, not miracles. The driver whistled. "That sounds like work." "It is," he said, "and it's cheaper than pretending." The woman stared at the road ahead. "Cheaper than fire," she added. "Cheaper than fear." The thoughtful man told a story about a man named Curtis who used to install windows before a fall shattered his ankle and his savings. Pain pills came like small white promises that slowly rewired the map of his days. By the time the prescription ended, he said, the pain didn't. The world got loud and narrow. Curtis lost his van, then his number, then the version of himself that could call friends without shame. He doesn't steal because he loves chaos. He steals because the night is a judge with no mercy. The woman's mouth tightened, and my porch becomes the courtroom. The city worker nodded. That's the knot. We braid suffering with public space, then argue about who owns the rope. The driver drummed the steering wheel. Every side thinks it's bleeding more, he muttered. Maybe they're all right. Blood doesn't care who's right.
They crossed into a district where new condos rose like careful teeth. A sandwich board advertised urban serenity, as if the word could be sold by the square foot. The woman scoffed. Serenity for who? The city worker answered gently, for whoever can afford the lock. He glanced at a fenced construction site, cranes idling like tall, patient animals. We negotiated 5% affordable units, he said. It felt like a victory until the waiting list swallowed them. The thoughtful man traced a circle on the fogged window. 5% compassion is still 95% weather, he murmured. The driver smirked. Developers love weather. It absolves everyone. A jogger passed, earbuds in, skipping over a crack where weeds insisted on living. Look, the woman said softly, startling herself. I want people inside. I also want my street pack. The worker sighed. 2 truths, 1 budget, and a chorus of lawsuits. The driver recalled a city meeting where a man waved a photo of a tent beside a playground slide and shouted until his voice broke. Another woman stood and read names. People dead from exposure, overdose, a fire started by a candle, and a winter draft. Everybody clapped at the end like applause could pass a bond. He switched lanes. There's a hunger for villains because it's easier than feeding solutions. The thoughtful man looked at the city worker. Who's your villain this month? The worker gave a tired smile. Time, he said. Time and the price per square foot. The homeowner snorted. My villain is the guy screaming at 3 a.m. She paused. And maybe the politician who told me this would be fixed by spring? The driver nodded. Spring is a liar in this town, he said. It shows up and leaves its coat on. The woman leaned forward again, voice rough. I filed reports. I sent videos of fights by the berm. Officer said call when it's happening. When it's happening, the last thing I want is to be the camera crew. Her hands trembled. My daughter asked if we were going to move. I told her no because we can't afford to start over. The thoughtful man said, that's a kind of homelessness too, being stuck where fear rents a room. The city worker stared at his badge. We're piloting a community responder team, clinicians and outreach, not just cops. It's slow. Hiring, training, contracts. People burn out. He cleared his throat. We're also expanding safe parking for folks in cars. The driver grunted. Cars are just tents with engines. The worker didn't disagree. At least the heater works, he said. The woman closed her eyes. Until the gas money runs out, she whispered. They rolled past a line of portable toilets tagged with neon crowns. The city worker pointed. Twice weekly servicing, he said. It cuts complaints, disease, and resentment. It doesn't fix nights. The thoughtful man nodded. Dignity has hinges, a door you can close. The woman stared at the plastic cubicles. I never thought toilets would make me cry, she said, almost laughing. The driver shrugged. We cry for what we thought the city already knew how to do. A volunteer in a bright vest hauled a bag of trash toward a pickup, face red with effort. We pay them stipends from a cleanup fund, he added. It keeps some cash out of the wrong hands. The woman asked, and the right hands? He spread his palms. They're busy holding on. The thoughtful man whispered, Sometimes survival is the job, and the paycheck is being here tomorrow. The driver told them about a man who rode in his back seat last winter, quiet as snowfall, hands tucked into his sleeves. He kept thanking the heat like it was a person. When he got out, he folded the blanket I keep back there like a letter to a friend. The woman looked at the floor mat. "You keep a blanket?" He nodded. "2. And a plan to quit this job every other Wednesday." The thoughtful man smiled sadly. "Quitting is a fantasy that tastes like control." The city worker glanced at the driver. "You see more of this city than most council members," he said. "What would you pass if you could?" The driver thought. "A law that forces every meeting to end with keys. Actual keys, or we stay in the room." Silence filled the car, heavy as coats hung on the same hook. They stopped at a light where a billboard preached luxury. "Live above it all." The woman barked a humorless laugh. "Above what? The rest of us?" The thoughtful man replied, "It's a promise and a warning." The city worker adjusted his lanyard. "We tax these projects. We carve out dollars for housing. Then we argue whether housing is an expense or an investment." He pressed his lips together. "I keep saying, roofs save ER visits, police calls, court hours. But budgets like costs in someone else's column." The driver checked the mirror. "Budgets are mirrors that don't show the whole face." The light turned green and the car surged. The woman's tone softened for one beat. "My neighbor Teresa leaves soup by the alley. She's furious and kind, both at once." The thoughtful man nodded. "That's the truest temperature of a city. Furious and kind." The city worker detailed a win like a small candle. A couple with a dog, Bear, accepted a placement after 6 months of hell. The shelter let the dog stay. We held the spot open until they trusted it. A case manager walked them to the door every night for a week. Last Friday, they signed a short-term lease. He allowed himself a thin smile. "They texted me a photo of Bear asleep on a rug." The woman swallowed. "That's good," she said, grudging but sincere. The thoughtful man asked, "What did it cost?" The worker answered, "Less than the cost of doing nothing." The driver nodded. "Nothing is the priciest policy in America." They passed a liquor store where the neon open flickered between invitation and warning. Some folks need a bed in the lock. Some folks need a bed, a lock, and a witness who doesn't flinch. The woman's fury returned like a familiar tune. "I won't let my kid bike alone anymore," she said. "The school counselor told us to practice brave breathing. I want brave patrols, brave cleanup, brave consequences." She shook her head. "Where are the rules?" The thoughtful man answered gently, "Rules without rooms become traps." The city worker added, "We enforce when we can. No open flames, no blocking sidewalks, no selling stolen goods. But enforcement without placement just moves the problem to another doorstep." The driver snorted. "We've invented musical chairs for misery." The woman met his eyes in the rear view. "Then add chairs," she said. "Add them now." The worker nodded. "We're trying. Modular units, tiny homes, rent buy-downs. But neighbors fight siding. Lawsuits stall. Weather doesn't wait." The thoughtful man stared out the window. "Weather never waits," he repeated. "And people are not made of tarps." They curved under the overpass, where shadows pooled like old water. A violinist played near a column, notes threading through the traffic's growl. The woman listened, eyes tight. "I hate this song," she said, then corrected herself. "No, I hate that this song makes me feel human about people who scare me." The thoughtful man nodded. "Fear and compassion can sit in the same seat," he said. "They just elbow each other a lot." The city worker looked up at the concrete ribs. "We've proposed sanctioned villages, security, services, curfews, clear paths into housing. It will anger everyone for different reasons, which might mean we're close to useful." The driver smiled grimly. "Equal opportunity anger is a milestone." The violinist slid into a melody so old it didn't need a name. For a moment, the road hummed with it, and the city seemed to remember a promise it once meant.
The woman crossed her arms tighter, almost hugging herself. "Promises are just smoke when the wind changes," she said. "Last year, the mayor stood on my street talking about cleanup crews and outreach vans. We got 1 week of cameras, 2 days of garbage pickup, then nothing." Her voice cracked, not from weakness, but from exhaustion. "I'm not asking for speeches. I'm asking for proof." The thoughtful man leaned forward. "Proof takes time," he said, "but so does decay. We've let this rot long enough." The city worker's eyes darkened. "Every time we push for lasting change, someone with more money wants it somewhere else. They win because they can afford lawyers. The rest of us lose because we can't afford delay." The driver grunted. "City Hall's main export is delay." Nobody laughed. Outside, the violin's last note drifted into the overpass shadows like it had someplace safer to be. The driver told them about a night last winter when he picked up a woman carrying a plastic bag of clothes and a toaster. She smelled like wood smoke and damp blankets. She said her boyfriend set the tent on fire after an argument. She left while it burned, didn't look back. The woman in the back seat stiffened. "See? That's what I'm talking about. Danger built into the block." The thoughtful man's voice was low. "That's trauma, not design." The city worker added, "Fires in camps are our worst fear. They spread fast, destroy lives in minutes." He glanced at the driver. "Did she find shelter?" The driver shook his head. "Said she'd crash in a stairwell downtown. It was warmer than the street." The car went quiet for a beat. The woman whispered, "Warmer than the street shouldn't mean concrete." The driver muttered, "Welcome to the city's definition of progress." They rolled past a boarded-up grocery store, tagged with layers of graffiti like overlapping arguments. The woman pointed. "That used to be my Saturday stop. Now it's a wall for gang signs." The city worker looked away. "We've tried to get a buyer, but financing dies when people read the crime stats." The thoughtful man said, "Abandonment breeds desperation. Desperation breeds crime. Crime breeds more abandonment. It's a loop." The driver cut in. "Loops are easier to maintain than solutions." The woman shook her head. "I'm sick of being told this is complicated. I know it's complicated, but I also know that my kid can't get a candy bar without stepping over a drunk." The worker's voice softened. "I don't blame you for wanting the loop broken. I just wish the hammer wasn't always pointed at people who can't afford shoes." The driver muttered, "Bare feet don't lobby very well." The thoughtful man began describing a morning at the pantry when a man traded a half-eaten muffin for a pair of socks. His feet were bleeding, he said quietly. The socks were worth more to him than breakfast. The woman closed her eyes briefly, and the driver noticed she didn't have a quick comeback. "Bleeding feet aren't my fault, but I can't walk past them without feeling something." The worker nodded. "That something is the only reason we're not worse off than we are." The driver smirked. "Feelings don't pay for dumpsters or detox." The worker replied, "But they decide whether dumpsters and detox happen at all." They drove by a playground where 2 kids climbed the same slide together, laughing. The thoughtful man pointed. "That's what we lose when the city gets divided into camps. Sidewalk kids and alley kids, growing up on different maps." A gust of wind rattled the car, carrying the scent of something burning. The woman's head snapped toward the berm. "Another fire?" she asked sharply. The city worker peered out. "Barrel fire. Looks contained." His tone was professional, but his eyes stayed locked on the flicker. "Containment is a gift we don't get often enough," he said. The thoughtful man murmured, "Containment is not the same as safety." The driver's voice was dry. "Safety is just the word we use to sell containment." The woman sat back, her shoulders rigid. "I don't care what you call it. If it means my house doesn't smell like smoke, I'll take it." The worker sighed. "And someone else will inhale it instead." The thoughtful man shook his head. "We keep passing the smoke instead of putting out the fire." Outside, the flame shivered in the wind, holding its ground against everything trying to erase it.
They turned down a block where a church hosted a weekly soup line. People stood, bundled in mismatched coats, their breath clouding in the cold. A volunteer ladled soup into a cracked thermos. The woman watched with something between pity and fatigue. "It's good they're feeding people," she said, "but it's not changing anything." The thoughtful man nodded. "It's survival, not transformation." The city worker added, "Transformation takes years, not Thursdays." The driver shrugged. "Thursdays keep people alive long enough to hate Mondays again." The woman frowned. "That's dark." "So's winter," the driver said. "We just dress it up with twinkle lights." The worker pointed at a man carefully balancing two bowls. "He used to be in our transitional housing program. He relapsed, lost his spot, and came back here. We're trying again." The woman said nothing, but her eyes followed him until the car turned the corner. The thoughtful man leaned forward. "What happens if we stop feeding them?" he asked quietly. The city worker answered without hesitation. "People die." The woman's lips tightened. "That's a hell of a choice between watching my neighborhood decay and watching people die." The driver's voice was sharp. "That's the choice because nobody with the money wants to make a third option." The worker's shoulders sagged. "We try to build it, but it gets torn down in meetings before it gets built in the dirt." The thoughtful man added, "Then the dirt becomes a bed again." The woman stared at the passing storefronts. "It's like the city is allergic to fixing things," she said. "We break out in committees." The driver laughed, bitter and short. "Committees keep people talking so they don't notice nothing's moving." The worker didn't disagree. "Sometimes I'm just grateful the talking doesn't turn into shouting." They passed a row of boarded houses, windows blind to the street. The woman gestured at them. "Why not put people in there?" The city worker sighed. "Code violations, asbestos, no plumbing, rehab costs triple new builds." The thoughtful man said, "So they sit empty while people freeze." The driver muttered, "Empty houses are just shelters for ghosts." The worker added, "We're trying to acquire some through land banks, but it's slow." The woman shook her head. "Everything is slow, except the part where my neighborhood gets worse." The thoughtful man nodded. "Decay moves faster than repair." The driver added, "And repair has a dress code and a permit process." The woman glanced out at the peeling paint, the sagging roofs. "Every one of those used to be a home," she said. The city worker's voice dropped. "And everyone could be again, if we decided it mattered more than paperwork." The driver shared a story about an old man named Frank who lived in a van behind a warehouse. He said the hardest part wasn't the cold, it was the quiet, no one saying his name for days. The thoughtful man closed his eyes. "Loneliness is a killer too." The woman said softly, "Sometimes I don't talk to my neighbors anymore because all we do is complain. I miss talking about normal things." The city worker nodded. "Complaints become the only common ground when everyone's tired." The driver gripped the wheel. "That's why the city stays tired. It keeps us from asking for more." The thoughtful man opened his eyes. "Maybe we start by saying names again." The woman nodded slowly. "Names, not labels." The worker smiled faintly. "That's harder than you think in my job." The driver muttered, "It's harder than you think in mine, too." The woman asked the city worker point blank, "When will this end?" He didn't dodge. "It won't. Not in the way you want. There will always be people on the edge. But it can get better. Smaller, safer, less visible." The thoughtful man said, "Less visible isn't always better." The driver added, "It's just better for the brochures." The worker shrugged. "I can't change the whole system. I can only fight for the slice I'm in." The woman leaned back, eyes on the ceiling. "Then tell me how to fight for mine." He replied, "Show up to meetings, push for funding, support housing even when it's built near you." She snorted.
So I have to live next to the solution to fix my problem? The thoughtful man smiled faintly. That's how neighborhoods become communities. The driver chuckled. Or how communities become new neighborhoods full of the same old problems. The woman stared out the window, chewing on the city worker's words. Support housing near me, she muttered. That's easy for people who don't live with their garbage bins tipped over every other morning. The thoughtful man answered softly, and hard for people sleeping under train noise every night. The driver glanced at her in the mirror. The trouble is both sides think they've already given enough. The city worker said, they have, but enough in one house isn't the same as enough in another. The woman sighed, leaning her head against the glass. I want my kid to ride her bike without looking over her shoulder. The thoughtful man replied, and I want Curtis to sleep without clutching a wrench like a weapon. The driver muttered, looks like we've got the same wish with two different names. The worker nodded. And a city still trying to spell it right. They stopped at another red light. A young man, in layers of mismatched coats, walked between the lanes with a squeegee, smearing more than cleaning. The woman locked her door with a quick push of her thumb. The thoughtful man watched the squeegee man pause at each car, then shuffle on. That's a person who's been told no more times than his name, he said. The city worker's jaw tightened. We've offered him services. He refuses every time. The driver shrugged. Maybe saying no is the only thing that feels like control. The woman had a head. Then control is overrated. The worker answered, for some, it's all they've got. The light turned green, and the squeegee man stood in the median, framed by exhaust and brake lights, like he was deciding whether to move or disappear. The driver rolled forward without looking back in the mirror.
The woman shifted in her seat. So what? You just keep offering help until they take it? The city worker nodded. Over and over. Sometimes it's the 12th time, sometimes it's never. But when it works, it changes everything. The thoughtful man said, patience is an ugly word when you're scared, but it's the only one that builds trust. The driver smirked. Patience also pays in pennies while the rent's due in hundreds. The worker replied, it's slow, but it's how we avoid pushing people into worse. The woman frowned. Worse than this? The driver answered flatly, prison, graves, empty lots where tents used to be. The thoughtful man looked at her. It's not compassion's versus safety, it's compassion for safety. She sighed, clearly not convinced, but not ready to fight the phrasing either. The city rolled by outside, caught between steel cranes and cardboard shelters, both waiting for the same future. They passed under another bridge, where the air smelled of damp cement. A figure lay on a blanket, barely moving, a dog curled into their chest. The woman's eyes followed the scene until it slipped out of sight. That's someone's kid, she murmured. The thoughtful man nodded. Every one of them is someone's kid. The driver gripped the wheel. Doesn't mean their parents are alive, or sober, or welcome. The city worker's voice softened. I've reunited a few families. It's never easy. Sometimes it works, sometimes it's one more heartbreak. The woman asked quietly, do you ever give up? He looked out at the road. Every Friday night. And then Monday comes. The thoughtful man said, the job's not hope, it's repetition. The driver added, like driving. Same streets, different passengers. You just pray one ride changes the route. Nobody spoke for a moment, letting the hum of tires do the talking. A billboard for a luxury apartment complex loomed ahead. Smiling couples with wine glasses, a rooftop pool shimmering under fake stars. The woman scoffed. Who believes this crap? The driver said, people who can afford the view. The thoughtful man said, everyone wants a rooftop. Some just settle for a tarp. The city worker sighed. These developments fight affordable housing like it's a disease, but we need their tax dollars. The woman asked, so you trade dignity for revenue? He hesitated. We call it balance. The driver barked a laugh. Balance is just a prettier word for compromise. The thoughtful man looked at the glowing rooftop in the picture. He should make the pool public, he said. Let everyone swim under those stars. The worker smiled faintly. It'd be drained in a week. The woman muttered, maybe, but at least for 1 week the view wouldn't be a lie. They neared her street again.
The berm was alive with motion, voices raised, a dog barking, someone dragging metal across gravel. The woman's shoulders tensed instantly. "Here we are," she said bitterly. "The city's favorite problem child." The city worker studied the scene. "We've got outreach scheduled tomorrow morning. I'll be here." The thoughtful man asked, "And what happens then?" "Same as always. We'll offer services, a few will take them, most will stay." The driver pulled over to let a cyclist pass. "And the wheel keeps spinning," he muttered. The woman's gaze stayed fixed on the tents. "One day it's going to take more than patience," she said. The thoughtful man answered quietly, "It always does. Patience just buys the time to figure out what more looks like." The worker didn't speak, but his hand tightened on his badge like it was a lifeline. The driver slowed near her block. "I'll drop you first," he said. The woman didn't argue. She kept looking out the window, eyes darting from one tent to another like she was mapping danger. "I'll be at that meeting next week," she told the worker. "You better have something besides excuses." He nodded. "I'll bring updates, not miracles." The thoughtful man smiled faintly. "Updates are how miracles start." The driver muttered, "And how they die." The woman ignored him, clutching her bag. "If you don't show up, I'll call you out," she told the worker. "Fair," he said. The car slowed to a stop, and she opened the door, the wind catching her hair. She glanced back once before stepping onto the curb, as if half expecting the tents to follow her home. The door shut with a sound heavier than it should have been. The driver eased back into traffic. The thoughtful man shifted in his seat. "She's angry, but she's not wrong," he said. The city worker nodded. "Nobody in this conversation is wrong. That's the problem." The driver kept his eyes on the road. Truth has too many sides for a city this small. The thoughtful man added, "And the sides keep bleeding into each other." The worker leaned his head back. "You think I don't get sick of it? I go home, and my neighbor complains about graffiti on his garage. Then I drive past the same guy sleeping under the graffiti, and I see both complaints at once." The driver smirked. "Welcome to the club." The thoughtful man looked out at the street lamps winking on. "Maybe we should all be in the same club, but nobody wants to pay the dues." The worker murmured, "The dues are empathy, and we're short on cash." The driver dropped the thoughtful man next. He stepped out slowly, pausing to look back inside. "You keep driving, man. People need to hear you talk like this." The driver shook his head. "People need to listen, not just hear." The man smiled, nodded, and closed the door gently, disappearing into the glow of his apartment building's entrance. The city worker slid over to the other side of the back seat. "Just us," he said. The driver chuckled. "Feels like a budget meeting." They drove in silence for a block, the city's noises filling the gaps. Sirens in the distance, a bus sighing at a stop, wind scraping across the hood. The worker finally said, "I don't think we'll ever solve it. Not completely." The driver replied, "Doesn't mean you stop swinging." The worker nodded. "No. It just means you swing knowing the tree might outlive you."
The driver pulled up to the worker's address, a modest duplex with a small light over the porch. The man hesitated before getting out. "You know," he said, "I get yelled at from every direction. Homeowners, advocates, the mayor, the press. But the hardest part is knowing they're all yelling for something real." The driver looked at him. "You still show up, though." The worker gave a tired smile. "So do you." He stepped out, closing the door with care. The driver watched him walk up the path, badge swinging, shoulders squared against the night. When the door shut behind him, the driver turned the wheel, heading back toward the arterial that fed into downtown. The tents would still be there tomorrow. So would the complaints, the meetings, the small wins, and the bigger losses. The city was a loop, and like it or not, he was still driving in it. Moral lessons. Fear and compassion can coexist. The homeowner's fear doesn't erase the homeless person's humanity, and compassion doesn't erase the homeowner's fear. Systemic problems create personal pain. Policy delays, funding knots, and lawsuits ripple directly into ordinary people's neighborhoods and lives. Small wins matter, even when they don't feel like enough. A dog sleeping on a rug, a child reunited with family, or a safe night in a cot can be fragile but real progress. Everyone is paying a price. Homeowners pay in fear, The homeless pay in suffering, city workers pay in burnout, and drivers pay in cynicism. Blame is easy. Solutions are slow. Anger alone doesn't solve anything, but neither does endless patience. Both must meet in the messy middle. The city is a loop we all drive through. Whether in a car, a tent, or an office, no one escapes the consequences of ignoring human suffering. Thanks for watching. Please leave comments, like, share, and subscribe so that you will be the first to be notified our next installment coming up.